Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday School Hour. If you would be opening on up to Isaiah chapter 17. Isaiah 17. So the past few weeks we've been studying about the fall of these nations within the context of Babylon. And I'd like to read just one verse to get started here from Revelation 16, verse 19, which describes what we're studying here. It says there in Revelation 16:19, it says, "And the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell." So that's exactly what we've been studying here in Isaiah, the fall of the nations. And it says, "And great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath." So far we've studied, we've seen woes against Palestine, against Moab, and this morning we're going to attempt to study the woe of Damascus and also Ethiopia. All right, so as we've seen, Isaiah, he prophesies through these near fulfillments that's coming in his near future on these nations, but some of these statements that we read, they weren't fulfilled back in those days because they clearly point forward to the day of the Lord. And that's exactly how prophecy works. A lot of times it's a dual fulfillment. We know that this is true because Jesus himself, he quoted something from Daniel in his Olivet Discourse when he was describing the events surrounding his return. So that's proof in itself right there that the prophets saw something that extended far beyond just their day, that it extended into the last days.
I want to add to that as well, because we've heard this before, but it's good that we hear it continually. Oftentimes people would describe the book of Revelation as being in our day, in the past. But John the Revelator, which lived past Christ, lived past, I'd say, all the apostles. And Christ spoke directly to him in Revelation 1:19, and he said, "Write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter."
Yeah.
So we will. I just want to assure the church that we will eventually. These things will come to pass.
True. Yeah. That's a very good point right there to make. All right, so let's begin reading here in verse 1 of chapter 17. So it says, "The burden of Damascus." All right, so where is Damascus? Well, Damascus is the capital city of the country of Syria. That country borders Israel to the north, if you don't know. So Damascus, I looked it up, it says that it is the oldest continually inhabited city in the world. And it appears as early as the book of Genesis, where Abraham mentions his servant Eliezer from Damascus. So that means that Damascus was already a city just shortly after the flood. All right, so Damascus, it's always been this political, military, religious rival to Israel and the God of Israel. And it still is to this very day. In recent years, we've seen the evil that continues to come out of the Syrian regime in this area here. They use chemical weapons on people. They use Islamic jihad, which is war, holy war against God's people. So now you know just a little bit about Damascus. So it says, "Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap." So this is different than just God pronouncing judgment on Damascus and bringing another king or a rod of judgment in to overthrow Damascus. Isaiah describes here how this city will cease from being a city. It's going to be a ruinous heap. That means nobody is going to live there anymore. All right, so a great example of this magnitude of destruction we see described in the book of Genesis with Sodom and Gomorrah. That is the example of destruction that he's describing here with Damascus. You know, the city, it's gone through many sieges and changes of power over the years, but Damascus, as I said, it's always remained a city. It's never been destroyed like Isaiah is talking about here. It existed in the time of Daniel and Ezekiel and all the prophets. It existed during the time of the apostles, and it still is a city to this day. But Isaiah is saying there's coming a day when this city will no longer exist. All right, verse 2, it says, the cities of Aroer are forsaken. They shall be for flocks or animals, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. So that's just another way of saying that man's no longer going to dwell there. It'll be for the grazing animals. And that's kind of an interesting picture if you think about it, because if these cities are destroyed and their buildings and their homes are just left as ruinous heaps, can animals really graze and lie down and eat in those situations? Well, it'd be really hard for them to. So, to me, this verse kindly implies there will be a restoration of the land after this destruction. Perhaps that's even hinting at the new heavens and the new earth that follow this destruction of the last days. That's just a thought. I don't know. But anyway, continuing there, verse 3, it says the fortress, or you could say the strongholds or the strength, also shall cease from Ephraim. That's one of the northern tribes of Israel. And the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria. They shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. So we can see the near fulfillment of this over in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 16, when, you know, the northern tribes of Israel, if you remember, they allied with the king of Syria to fight this growing empire of Assyria. And do you remember what happened to Damascus and the northern tribes of Israel? Well, they were conquered by the Assyrian. So their fortresses or their strongholds were seized, and the survivors that weren't killed, they were taken captive back to the lands of Assyria. So all that was kind of a shadow of what Isaiah and the prophets prophesied will happen during the last days. All right, that's also why you see in the prophets they talk about the Lord regathering his people from the lands of the north. Well, the lands of the north was the lands of Assyria. So this second Exodus we've been reading about and seeing, that's the lands of the north. So that's why it's kind of a shadow of what will happen in the future. All right, verse 4. It says, and in that day, which I think that is speaking of the day of the Lord, it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. So I think Isaiah is looking way ahead in his future here to the time of Jacob's trouble, the great tribulation. This is when Jacob's pride, you know, Israel's pride that they can survive on their own without the help of their Messiah, they're going to be brought low during this time. That's what the Great Tribulation really is all about. So the fatness of Jacob's flesh waxing lean, that implies that there's going to be great famine, great death. And we know that plays a huge part in the book of Revelation. All right, verse 5 says, and it shall be as when the harvestman gathereth the corn, and reapeth the ears with his arm, and it shall be as he that gathereth ears in the valley of Rephaim. Yet gleaning grapes shall be left in it, as the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uttermost bough, 4 or 5 in the outmost fruitful branches thereof, saith the Lord God of Israel. So he kind of gives us two pictures here of what the day of God's wrath is going to look like. This first picture here is of a cornfield. And he looks out, and all he sees is the corn is harvested, and all that remains on the ground is just a few little kernels or a few little corn cobs laying around. So everything's been harvested except there's just a few laying on the ground. And what he's wanting us to see here is just like that harvest there, so will be these cities and the people of Syria and northern Israel in that day. You understand what I'm saying here? This great harvest is going to take place at the end of the age. Jesus said it there in the gospel. So the redeemed are going to receive their glorified bodies. The wicked that worship this beast, they're going to be destroyed. And there's going to be a few of these gleaning kernels of corn, these surviving remnant that we've read about. They're not going to be part of the great harvest, but they will enter into the millennial kingdom in their mortal bodies. That's what the very few, the remnant, those who remain, those who survive, we see in the sheep-goat judgment, the sheep enter in. All right, so this second picture is of a vineyard that's been shaken by a mighty wind or a mighty earthquake, and only a few grapes are left in the tops of the trees. So in the same way, this will be the picture of the cities and the people in the day of the Lord's wrath. So, speaking of grapes being shaken off the tree by a mighty earthquake, do we see any kind of great shaking described in the book of Revelation? Sure we do. We see many great earthquakes, but there's one great earthquake in particular that I want to look at in Revelation 16. And I'm going to be taking a lot of text this morning from Revelation 16, so if you want to keep a bookmark there, that'd be good. Revelation 16, verses 17 to 19. And it says, "And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, It is done. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell." I read that to begin with. So these, I call them sour grapes. That's what they are. These grapes, symbolized by the wicked here, they're falling to the ground out of these trees. And what's going to happen to them? They're going to get trampled in the winepress. That's what happens to the grapes in all of prophecy. They get trampled in the winepress. So you also see this described in Revelation 14, verses 18 to 20. It says, "And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over the fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city," meaning outside the city, "and blood came out of the winepress even to the horses' bridles by the space of 1,600 furlongs. So that's roughly 180 miles there. We've talked a little bit about that. That's not going to be a pretty sight, folks. A river of blood flowing for 180 miles this deep. All right. Any comment or questions on anything so far? Go ahead.
I think this is good because you remember in the book of John, I think it was, Jesus said that I am the true vine.
Yeah.
So there is a vine of the earth, and then there's a vine of heaven.
Yeah.
And I think the majority of folk will go with the vine of the earth. And
yeah.
like you said, will bring forth. It'll be a grape, but it won't be the grape of heaven.
No.
It will be a fruit, but not a good one.
A bad fruit, evil
Yeah,
fruit.
Evil fruit.
Yeah. All right, verse 7, it says, at that day shall a man look to his Maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. We've already discussed who this Holy One of Israel is. It's God, yet the New Testament says that it's Christ. So that means Christ is God. All right, verse 8, and he shall not look to the altars, the work of his hands, neither shall respect that which his fingers have made, either the groves or the images. In that day shall his strong cities be as a forsaken bough and an uppermost branch, which they left because of the children of Israel, and there shall be desolation. All right, I got a ton of stuff we can talk about in these 3 verses. So, one of God's purposes in judgment, it's always to get the people to turn from their idols and turn to Him. So in the midst of God's wrath being poured out on the earth there in that day, some's going to look to their Maker, some's going to look to Jesus, some will not. Actually, many will not. So I want to look back to Revelation 16. I want to look at the reaction of those who have taken the mark of the beast as these vials of wrath are being poured out and what they're going to do. All right, so Revelation 16, verse 8 to 9, it says, and the 4th angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. And men were scorched with great heat, and they blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. All right. Revelation 16, verses 10 and 11. And the 5th angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness. And they gnawed their tongues for pain and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and they repented not of their deeds. That's not good. It's because we know there's only 7 vials of wrath, and we're already at 5. So Revelation 16, verses 17 and 21, this is the final vial. It says, and the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple in heaven from the throne, saying, it is done. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone weighing about a talent. That's about 100 pounds. And it says, and men blasphemed God because of the plague of hail, for the plague thereof was exceedingly great. So you would think with all these supernatural events taking place and God destroying their cities, God destroying everything they've got, that they would see the light. But no, it says that they curse God and they will not repent. So that's just the sign of a fully hardened heart, ain't it?
Yeah.
Like Pharaoh. But it's, Isaiah says here that some will look to their Maker in that day. So I feel like they will be saved. All right, verse 9 here, it's a kind of an interesting statement. It says, in that day shall his strong cities be as a forsaken bough and an uppermost branch, which they left. So they're leaving their cities. And why are they leaving their cities? It says, because of the children of Israel, and there shall be desolation. So these people, I feel like they're leaving their cities and their homes because of the children of Israel. Why? Because of the children of Israel? Well, because they want the children of Israel destroyed. They want them exterminated. Ain't that what Satan's wanted all throughout history? Is the Jews gone, destroyed? This is going to be the nation's final rage against Israel to try to destroy them once and for all. And I love how Psalm 2 describes this. The psalmist says, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? For the kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers to take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. That's kind of describing what I just said there. And it says, he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then he shall speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. All right. So I intentionally skipped over a part in Revelation 16 there. If you caught it, I wanted to connect that to verse 9 here. So going back to Revelation 16, verses 13 through 16. It says, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon. Who would that be? Satan. And out of the mouth of the beast. This would be the persecuting nations as a whole, or you could call it Mystery Babylon the Great. And out of the mouth of the false prophet. That's describing the Antichrist. For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and the whole world, to gather them to battle of the great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And he gathered them together in a place called, in the Hebrew tongue, called Armageddon. So that's the valley of Megiddo that runs from northern Israel down through Jerusalem, and it keeps going all the way down into Edom or modern day Jordan. That valley is 180 miles long. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. All right. Now here's why God is going to gather the wicked to this valley in that day. Look at verse 10. Back to Isaiah 17, verse 10. Because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation, and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength. The Bible says that Jesus is the rock. He is our strength. He is our salvation. So therefore shalt thou plant pleasant plants, and shall set it with strange slips. To me, that's the imagery of Satan planting tares among the wheat. You're planting pleasant plants, but and shall set it with strange slips right in amongst them. All right, verse 11. In that day shalt thou make thy plant to grow, and in the morning shalt thou make thy seed to flourish. Who's making these flourish and grow? The people are, not God. So that means that the people here of Damascus and this great Babylon as a collective unit, they're going to cause their abominations and their false religion to spread like gangrene all over the earth. And they will flourish for a short time, the Bible says. But Revelation 17, verses 1 and 2, and there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show you the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Waters there in that context describes the people. All right, so, and it says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So if this is speaking about the religion of Islam, which I fully believe it is, that religion is going to slowly infect every single nation on the earth. Do we not see that happening today, folks? So this beast, this false religion, is going to work very, very hard in the last days to force people to worship its religion. That's where the mark of the beast will come into play. That's force. Take it or die, in other words. So after all their hard work of trying to force people to worship that religion, look at the rest of verse 11 here to see what kind of harvest they're going to produce. So the end of verse 11 there says, But the harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and desperate sorrow. So in the great and terrible day of the Lord there, you could say, Islam will produce this harvest of sour grapes. What we say happens to sour grapes in prophecy? They get crushed under the foot of God. All right, verse 12, woe to the multitude of many people. Again, Islam is nearly 3 billion people now in the earth out of 8 billion people. So they're over a quarter of the population and growing rapidly. So woe to the multitude of many people, woe to the multitude of many people which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. So they're going to crash like waves on the shore. They destroy whatever. If you got a sandcastle built there, the waves destroy it, right? That's the way that these people are going to be. Verse 13, the nations shall rush. So, in other words, they're going to lay waste to the land, like the rushing of many waters. But God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee from far off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. All right, so the enemies of God laying waste to the earth, because of war and everything. That's described to a T, really, in Revelation 11, verse 18. This is talking about the seventh trumpet when the Lord comes back. It says, the nations were angry, and thy wrath has come, the wrath of God, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto the servants, the prophets, and the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. So that's saying, kind of what Isaiah's saying here. Those who destroy the earth, the nations that rush like rushing waters. All right. Verse 14, and behold, at evening tide trouble, and before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. So the picture here is there's going to be some trouble for God's people in the evening, or the final hours of this age, you could say. But when morning comes, the enemy, the trouble, all that's going to be gone just like a dream. So when the sun, the S-O-N, dawns on the horizon, God, he's a beautiful poet. If you ever study prophecy like I have, you'll see that he's a beautiful poet. He's described as dawning as the morning sun. That's one of the reasons I think now, as I've studied it more since Isaiah 14, I think that's one of the reasons why he's called the bright morning star. He's going to rise like the sun on the earth in that day. So that finishes woe or judgment on Damascus. Does anybody got a question or a comment? I'm going to try to go ahead and tackle chapter 18 too. It's a pretty short one, if there's no comments or questions. Also, if you want to read any more about the fall of Damascus in your own time, you can read what Jeremiah has to say about it in Jeremiah 49, verses 23 to 27. That he talks about the fall of Damascus as well. So let's start here in chapter 18, verse 1. It says, woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Now, some of our Bibles title this chapter, Woe Against Ethiopia. This is really more than just Ethiopia. It says beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. So to me that would include that whole northeastern region of Africa, minus Egypt. So we're going to talk about Egypt next week. But you've got the countries of Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, I guess you could say, is in there. And all these countries were known in the ancient times as the land of Cush. Does anybody remember who Cush was? He was a son of one of Noah's sons. Ham, I think, was Noah's son. So he's a descendant of Noah, and his descendants or his children, they came down from Mount Ararat. They come down south and they settled in these areas here.
I might add too. We've been talking about Damascus and Syria. Everybody knows those are Muslim nations.
Oh yeah.
But Ethiopia and all that is also primarily Muslims.
They are, yeah.
So,
about 98% of the people are Muslim. There's a very small minority that are Christians, and they actually have to live in the mountains and the caves to even worship without being noticed. I mean, they're worshiping, you could call it, in an underground church. And so are the people in Iran. There is a literal underground church in Iran. All right. There's other prophecies such as Ezekiel 38 and 39 that mentions Cush as being part of this end times coalition of nations that's going to come against Israel. So I believe it's safe to say this is a woe against all those modern day countries that are in this ancient land of Cush. All right. Verse 1 also says this is a land of shadowing with wings. Does anybody know what that might mean or imply? Well, I think it's talking about the Nile River basin, which it's teeming with every kind of insect you could imagine, flies, mosquitoes, you name it. So that's just another clue there to specify which region Isaiah is talking about here, the Nile River basin, which flows through all these countries that I just mentioned. All right, so verse 2, it says, this is talking about the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that sendeth ambassadors by the sea, even in vessels of bulrushes upon the water, saying, Go, ye swift messengers, to a nation scattered and peeled, to a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. Now this nation that's been scattered and peeled, the people terrible from their beginning, a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land's been spoiled. Who do you think he's referring to there? It's not Ethiopia. He's talking about the nation of Israel here. So Isaiah, he foresees these North African countries sending ambassadors to the land of Israel in that day. Now the word ambassador in Hebrew has a totally different meaning than what we think ambassador means today. So in Hebrew, the word ambassador means an envoy or messengers of pain and distress. We don't think of the word ambassadors like that today, do we? But in Hebrew, that's what that word meant. So let me ask you a question, as I've asked before, as Miles just stated, what religion are these countries today? Do they bring pain and distress to the people of God? Sure they do. All right. That means they're in submission to this Antichrist. They're going to be against God's people. So, like I said, Ezekiel 38, 39 describe that. Daniel chapter 11 hits really hard on it. And those other prophecies, they confirm that this land of Cush, they're going to be in subjection to this beast and this Antichrist in the last days. So, verse 3 there says, All ye inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, see ye when he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains, and when he bloweth a trumpet, hear ye. All right, so these ambassadors of Cush and these countries, Ethiopia and Sudan and so forth, they're going to lift up this ensign or this banner on the mountains, which I think is pointing to the mountains of Israel, and they're going to blow a trumpet. So they're going to assemble for a great battle, in other words. Isaiah, he's telling the inhabitants of the world here take notice and see and hear when you see this take place. You know, what did Jesus say to John over there at the sixth vial of wrath in Revelation 16? We read it a minute ago. He said, "Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame." And he gathered them to a place in the Hebrew called Armageddon. So I think verse 3 here really is a sign to the world in that day when they see this happen, when they see nations gathered against Israel. That's a sign to the world that Jesus is about to come back. Wouldn't you think? Okay. Verse 4, "For so the Lord said unto me, I will take my rest, and I will consider in my dwelling place like a clear heat upon herbs, and like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest." So this is describing God's wrath boiling up as he sits in his dwelling place in heaven. He's looking down at all this getting ready to take place. You know, clear heat. If you've ever seen a Jeep or a truck that's overheating, that clear heat's rising. You can see the heat. That's kind of the picture I get here of God. He's getting hot.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I can't remember, but do you remember, wasn't it in the book of Revelation when John seen the throne room, it was thick of smoke? And I just kind of think that maybe that's boiling out of the throne room, you know.
Isaiah also saw it in chapter 6.
Yes, yeah.
When he had that vision.
Yeah.
You remember the stones that were burning, and one of the angels touched his lip. Yeah. So there was hot coals all around the throne. Yeah. So that's describing, you know, fire from God. Yeah. Let's see. So where was I at? Yeah. So this clear heat, that's like heat rising. You can see it rising. So God's getting hot here. It also says, "I will consider like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest." So any of you guys that's farmers, you know that it's not good to have rain when you're gathering in the harvest or gathering in your hay. You don't want the hay to get wet. So this is an image of judgment during the harvest, or the great harvest at the end of this age. And you see this judgment during the harvest described. Joel chapter 3 describes it. Also Revelation chapter 14. All right. Verse 5 says, or in other words, before the harvest, when the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripening in the flower, he shall both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks and take away and cut down the branches. They shall be left together unto the fowls of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth, and the fowls shall summer on them, and the beasts of the earth shall winter on them. I mean, it sounds like they're going to be laying around for quite a while if the birds are eating on them and then the beasts eating them in the wintertime. That's kind of gory imagery there, but that's what the Bible describes is going to happen at the last day. Yeah. The nations that come and attack Israel, they're going to be destroyed and left for the fowls and the beasts to eat. And in fact, we see it described in Revelation 19 there, that famous passage about the Lord coming on the white horse. You read about it there, it says, I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, "Come and gather yourself together unto the supper of the great God, that ye may eat the flesh of kings and of captains, and flesh of mighty men, flesh of horses, and them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, small and great. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army." That's the army of the Lord of hosts. All right, the last verse here, 7, it says, "In that time shall the present," or in other words, gifts, "be brought unto the Lord of hosts of a people scattered and peeled, and from a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden underfoot, whose land the rivers have spoiled." We already talked about who that is. That's talking about Israel. It's to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, the Mount Zion. So after all this is said and done, the remnant of the nations are going to come to Jerusalem. They're going to bring gifts. They're going to bring presents to the Lord of hosts in Mount Zion. And this is going to be during that millennial reign that we've talked about. So in some other places it says it calls these sacrifices instead of gifts. So they're going to bring them to the Lord of hosts in Zion on behalf of the people of Israel who's been spoiled by this spoiler in the last days. So how else do we know that that's going to take place? Well, Zechariah 14, it says, and the verse 9, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Lord, and his name one. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up year to year and worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, these are nations, the Gentile nations, celebrating a Jewish feast in Jerusalem with Israel, according to Torah. That's never happened to my knowledge. So this can't be fulfilled. Now you can read more about the Feast of Tabernacles and the type of sacrifices they did for that feast over in the book of Numbers, chapter 29, verses 12 to 40. You can read about that on your own time. So some people would say, well, this is blasphemy. They can't sacrifice. No, you got to know the motive behind these sacrifices first. These are not atoning sacrifices for sin. Jesus is still the atoning sacrifice for sin. And the people's going to know this in that day because Isaiah said the knowledge of the Lord is going to cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. So they're going to know who Jesus is during this day. They're going to know that he is the atoning sacrifice. If you actually go back and look in Numbers 29, it says that these gifts or these sacrifices, they're going to be food and drink offerings. They're going to be vow offerings, free will offerings, and peace offerings. Remember, it says that Isaiah's already said that there's going to be peace on the earth during that day. The nations are not going to take up sword against one another. They're not going to learn war anymore. So, and it says all these offerings are going to be pleasing to the Lord. Well, Brother Kyle, I just don't know about that. I don't know if I believe that. Well, is there any connection to that in the book of Revelation? They sure are. Revelation 21, verse 23 to 24, and this is talking about the New Jerusalem. And it says, and the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did light it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it. And the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. So they're bringing the glory and their honor. They're bringing sacrifices to Jerusalem in that day, in the millennium. So just trust the Word of God. Don't trust man's opinions on it. If the Word of God says it, if the prophets say it, we don't have to understand why or how it's going to happen. Just believe that it will. All right. Anybody got a comment or a question on anything there? This is kind of some tough stuff to study, but hopefully I gave you some light on it there. I've explained it the best I can with how I've studied it.
I think it's a good, wonderful tie to Revelation, you know.
It is, yeah.
And I think for some, when they read it, this don't make no sense. I believe you've done a very good job explaining what will shortly come to pass. And so I value these chapters here very much.
Thank you, brother. A lot of people get hung up on that, what he just said there, these phrases you see that says, shall shortly come to pass, or will come soon. Those seem like time markers, right? We got to understand this is not in man's time, this is in God's time. So a day to him is like 1,000 years, right? So when John was writing this in the first century, he said it's shortly going to come to pass. That didn't mean it's going to happen in the next few years. It's on God's timetable. So,
Well, also man doesn't know the time. So
right.
It could be tomorrow. It could
No
be
man
tomorrow.
knows the day or the hour. Yeah. Good point. Anybody else got a comment or question? All right, we'll take a break.